Okay, you just need to ignore all the practice I've done on the bottom. So my needle number 1 is here, and I'm going to pretend like I finished knitting the foot. The toe and the heel are pretty much identical, except for on the toe you have to pay attention on the last couple of rows because you're going to start knitting with waste yarn right at the last row so that you can graft without that extra row in there. But if you're doing the heel, then you would just continue on with your main yarn knitting the foot. Okay, instead of putting 30 needles in hold in this unmarked section, we're going to be only doing 28. So I'm going to get my number 1 needle over here ready to start knitting the first row. And I'm going to begin putting the needles in hold as I crank forward. I just can't get to all of them right now. So normally this needle would be the first one that I'd put in hold, but I'm not. I'm going to do one less on each side. So it's going to end up being 28. Same thing over here. Normally I do that needle, but I'm going to stop here. Okay, and then just do the 28 needles in hold. And then finish knitting to the gap. Okay, we're going to do, when we do this first 2 decreases, it's going to be 2 needles. So I'm going to pull up 2 needles to put those in hold, and then I'll do the same on the other side. That's only for the first 2 decreases. So I've pulled these needles up. They're not going to knit. And I'll go in reverse. And you see there's a wrap that goes across both of those needles. And now I'm going to do the same on this side, 2 needles. And then go forward. Now it's going to be like we normally do, 1 needle on each side until I get to the 10 needles in the middle. My little window unit is making a lot of noise. We still don't have electricity here. We're on generator power after Hurricane Delta and Hurricane Laura. Alright, I decreased that needle. One needle at a time, back and forth. The decreases don't normally give me trouble, but I like to be careful on that first needle as it goes down. What I'm doing today is not going to incorporate some of those techniques where they round the toe. I usually don't do that because I don't mind the little square at the top, because once it's blocked and you wear the sock and wash it, everything kind of rounds out on its own anyway. So I've got 1, 2, and then 1, 2 left here. This one should be the last one. Let me see. So these are all in the white needle section. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So that's perfect. Now I'm going to go ahead and knit this row. Some of the instructions you'll see will tell you to go ahead and start increasing on the opposite side of the carriage, but I'm going to be doing it differently than I did before. So that needle has been decreased. I'm going to knit the 10 needles, and then we're going to start our increases. Okay, normally what I did in the past would be wrap this needle and then increase opposite the working yarn. And I would have to reach under here and grab all these loops, put them back in the hook of the needle, and it was so time consuming and really hard to grab all the loops. And if you didn't grab all the loops, you would drop a stitch. So this one makes a really neat toe or heel. It's very smooth, and it's sort of like the no wrap heel and toe, except for on this machine it would be very difficult to do the no wrap, what they call the no wrap. What they normally do is they would put this needle down like that, and they would leave this working yarn under that latch, and as the carriage brings their carriage, most of them, the carriage moves around the needles, the carriage would automatically wrap that needle and place new yarn in the hook. But my machine doesn't do that. So what I have to do, and I found it's the no-fail way for me to avoid dropping stitches. So I take this yarn and I wrap the second needle that's in the up position. I put the yarn behind it, and I leave this yarn in front of the needle that I'm fixing to increase. So now I want to put this needle down so it'll start knitting, but I don't want to push it all the way down, just until the latch gets to where I can put that yarn above the latch. And then I'll slowly push it down, and I'll get that latch to close up over that new yarn that I just put in there. So this needle will be wrapped on the reverse, and this piece of yarn right here will be pulled down into that old stitch. So now I reverse, and that should be 11 needles. And I do this slowly because over here I have to make sure that it grabs yarn in the hook and not below the latch. So now I do the same thing on this side. I take this yarn and I wrap that second needle, and I increase 1 needle by putting it back down again, and this loop goes in the hook, the old loop goes below the latch. And so when this latch closes, it only has 1 loop in there. All the old loops should be down here below the latch. So that should be 12 needles. Now I'm just kind of watching that right there. I'm keeping an eye on my weights also, because the increases are really critical about the weight. So okay, again, wrap the second needle only. So this yarn should be going around all the rest. It should be on the outside, and it should be behind the second needle. And then we're going to put the first needle down, back into work, and that's an increase. So my new yarn is wrapped, it's locked inside that hook. So I need to adjust my weights already. Wrap the second needle, put 1 needle back in work. And make sure it knits again. And make sure when this needle comes up right here that the yarn didn't kind of flip back over again, because if the weights are not in the right position, we have so much fabric building up here that the weights have to be adjusted pretty often. Alright, so now I'm ready to wrap again. Oops, keep dropping it. And then increase a needle by putting it down and putting that in the hook, and the old loops are below the latch. doing that when I'm on that side. I can't really see when I'm reaching across. Just need to find a new way. If you keep making the same mistake over and over again, it's time to do something different. This is a lot faster than I used to do with the increases, and I think it's a nicer looking short row also. And just to tell you where I'm going, when I get back to these two needles that are wrapped together, they were decreased together, they're going to be increased together. All right, let's see. And these you might have to separate them out a little bit to get that around there because of the wrap. It's kind of squeezing them together. Alright, here's where it changes. Okay, since these are going to go down together, I need to wrap the third needle in. So I'm going to take this and put it around that third needle, and then I'm going to put these both down together. Now, you have to really be careful that they will knit together. I wrap the third needle, I've placed this new yarn in the hooks of those two needles, and the old loops should be behind the latches. So I can kind of shut the door on that and go back. So this yarn is going to be pulled down into those stitches, so I'll end up with only one loop. So I put two down together. That's my last two on that side. It's right here that I'm going to have two loops. Oh, my dog is coughing. I have two loops on that needle, and that's where, when I'm grafting, I'll have to remember that the second needle in on each side, or on one half of the machine, the second stitch in is going to have two loops. You have to be sure you stitch both of them when you're doing your grafting. So rather than confuse everything, I'm just going to leave it the way it is. But sometimes I'll knit it over, just kind of knit it. Alright, so I'm going to wrap this third needle on this side just like we did on the other. And then these two needles go back into work. Now if this were the heel, I would continue knitting in my main yarn. But since the toe is a little bit different, that's the one I'm going to show you. You have to start putting your waste yarn right here on needle number 1. This last needle here on this side is going to go ahead and wrap around. It's going to wrap around this needle, which you're going to have two loops on that one, and it's going to knit in this main color. The waste yarn is going to start on needle number 1. So this one knits in the main color, this last needle knits in the main, first needle knits in the waste yarn. And the reason for not going ahead and knitting this in the main color is because you're adding an extra row, and that's where you get all that bunching on the edges of the sock. So this kind of helps avoid that by not doing another row of your main yarn. I'm going to start going forward, but I cannot forget to put my needles in hold. Sometimes I spend all this time concentrating right here, and then my other needles come around and I have forgotten to put them in work again. So I'm just going to pay attention to these so I don't pass up needle number 1. And then I'm going to remember to put the rest of these down. You can go ahead and reach across the machine and start doing it, but I find it hard to do it on that side. I find it easier over here by me to put these in work, so I'm not going to even try. So what I want to do is leave enough yarn at this point to do my grafting. I always leave more than I need. And I'm going to leave that in the carrier. Going to load some waste yarn right along with it. And then we're going to arrange these two pieces of yarn to where they knit where we want them to. So remember, I want my waste yarn to knit on needle number 1, and I want this last needle to finish the wrap and grab that yarn there. So I'm going to go ahead and start inching forward to make sure that happens. So that needle has grabbed the white yarn, and my main yarn is going to grab right there, making sure it's above the latch. So I don't want to pull the waste yarn, the white yarn out yet. I want to make sure these are kind of secure, but I don't want the white yarn in with my number 1 needle because I want a gap. When I get ready to do my grafting, I like to see the gap. So just make sure all of this is knitting like it should. And I'm going to clip that because it will start loosening up since I don't have them hugging the needle. I'm going to go ahead and pin that. And I'm still watching the needles that are in hold. Okay, that's doing what it should, so I can stop worrying about it. Even though that's loosening up, I'm still not worried about it. And there is no tension on my waste yarn because it's sitting down here on the floor. So That's the second needle in here, and I've got to make sure I grab both of those loops, put that needle back in work, and all of the rest of these needles. Making sure the loop is above the latch, and then put some tension on this yarn and go forward. Or you can just go around and put all your needles in work, whichever way you prefer. Might be a good idea the first few times so that you don't forget to put them back in work. This is starting to rise up a little there. I went too far. I need to back up just a tad so I can get that needle down. Remember, you can't go in reverse because these needles will start dropping off, the stitches will drop off, so don't reverse too far. If you mess up, you'll have to start manually putting the stitches back in the hook. Same thing on the Addy knitting machine. You can't reverse on those either. Alright, so that's 2 loops there. That's also the second needle in here. So both of these I have to remember when I'm grafting that there are some of these stitches that have 2 loops that I have to graft. So I'm going to knit several rounds of waste yarn, and then I'm going to take this off of the machine. See that big old gap? I'm not worried about that. Alright, this is the one we just got off the machine. You can see there's no bunching right here. It looks really nice, and it looks a lot like the no-wrap heel that that's in the old vintage gearhart instructions for doing it their way. They had these instructions that said if you send your samples, this is the way we want them made, and so they had this technique of the way they wanted it done, and so I tried to duplicate it on this machine, and I had to make some modifications to make it work. But this is where my little gap is. This would be where I would start grafting, and that would all close up right there. But I think it looks really nice, and like I said, there's not a lot of bunching right there. Now, I didn't round the toe, but you can see it still looks pretty nice when it's blocked and fits to your foot. That's going to be a really nice looking sock. So here's a sample that I knit earlier, and since we're on generator power, I was not able to heat up my steam iron to blast this with some steam, so I wet it and I put it on this mannequin and stuck it outside in the sun, and you can see it rounds out nicely on the toe, and there's no bunching on the sides.